Oh, hey there, Fenton. What are you reading?
Oh, I've just stumbled upon the most incredible fantasy series here on Substack.
Oh, it's not Devine, is it? I'm almost done with the preludes leading up to the series.
Don't flatter yourself. And yes, I know about the preludes. You've only been promising them for the last 3 weeks.
Ugh. I hate it when my characters call me out.
In any case, this book is positively enrapturing. It's called Moonthread.
Oh, wait, you mean the first book in the Nala Nightheart series by Anthony Lee Phillips, right?
The very same. Look here, this line from the prelude. It reads, "It glows, the bone dagger glows, as red as quenched revenge."
Ha ha! By the Titans! I've been a bard my entire life, and I can scarcely remember such a powerful line from even one of my stories. I have to agree, that line is one of my favorites as well.
Oh, Reese reading says the moon threads as well.
Oh, hey there, Schmeagle. That's great. How you liking it so far?
We thinks we's in love. We loves as the orcs is.
Ah, yes, Nala is quite something, isn't she? Hey, that reminds me. Why aren't there orcs in Devine?
Yeah, we wants the orcs is. Gives us the orcs is.
Okay. I'll see about adding orcs to Devine. Just stop staring at me like that. Never forget who's in charge, Mr. Writer. Uh-huh. Well, you'll both be happy to hear that Anthony Lee Phillips, author of Moonthread, is this week's guest on the episode.
Obviously, that's why we're here. Now go on then, welcome everyone to the Saved as Draft podcast like you do.
Well, to be fair, Fenton, you just did.
Oh good, this opening's running too long anyway. Now where is that damn intro music?
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Saved as Draft podcast. Today's episode is going to be huge. We've got our weekly shoutouts, a bunch of level 3 power-up prompt stories from this week, our weekly writing discussion, which has a new twist, and our biggest interview yet. That's right. This week I'm welcoming onto the show fantasy author Anthony Lee Phillips, who is doing some amazing stuff with his book series right here on Substack. Not only is the entire first book available to read right now, but Anthony also released a collection of poems set in the same fantasy universe as well recently. You'll find a link to that in the show notes. And speaking of fantasy, I also want to shout out another writer that I work with at Audio Mazes. His name is Richard Pack, and he's the creator of the Emerald Worm's Den here on Substack. Richard's one of the best world builders I've ever encountered, and he recently told me that he's looking for more feedback and critiques from readers on Substack. So, in addition to checking out Anthony's work this week, be sure to head on over to Richard's publication, which I'll include in the show notes, and give him all the feedback and critique you'd like. He's eager to find out what people think and what they think could be improved, specifically in his Bloodsmith series. This is a great opportunity for us as writers to flex our feedback muscles, and I expect that Richard himself may be a guest on the show in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Another community shout-out I'd like to mention this week in the intro is a brand new opportunity for weekly guest spots on Derek James Kritzberg's Dread Reviews newsletter. This newsletter that Derek puts together is an amazing publication. It combines thoughtful, hilarious, and in-depth reviews of community stories that have me dying of laughter every time, while also discovering new writers. Derek recently opened up a new submissions process, where you can promote yourself and other writers by applying to be a guest author in an upcoming Dread Reviews newsletter. I'll drop a link to the submission guidelines in the show notes, but this is a really great opportunity to not only promote your work, but give yourself the chance to highlight a favorite author of yours on Substack as well. Derek has been kind enough to review several of my stories in recent months on prior Dread newsletters, and honestly, it's always an honor and a pleasure to read his thoughts. So again, check the show notes for a link to find out more about both these opportunities. One more item of housekeeping before we get into today's episode. As many of you know, I work in marketing at my day job, and it's been a while since I flew out to my company's office, since I work remotely, and I'm scheduled to do that next week. Seeing as how I'll be traveling and working in an office for the first time in over a year, I'm not going to have my podcast recording equipment with me, and as a result, the Saved as Draft podcast will be taking its first ever break next week. We've done nearly 30 episodes without a single missed week, but honestly I knew the time would come eventually when I'd have to miss one. So, there won't be an episode next week while I'm out of town, but rest assured that the podcast will triumphantly return the following week on August 1st with a brand new episode that Friday. Okay, and with all that out of the way, let's get to this week's shoutouts. I've got 5 fresh stories to share this week, each one picked at random from my weekly shoutouts thread in my subscriber chat. So let's see what you've been working on, shall we? First this week is The Promised Miracle by Hylia. This short story really captured my attention from the opening lines. It's set in a world ravaged by a plague and details the journey of one family member who strikes out to try and find clean water for her family. The setting and atmosphere here reminded me a lot of a film called The Witch, which is one of my brother's favorite movies, funny enough. Much like that film, this story does a wonderful job of leaning into the dangers of superstition, especially when they're used to justify violence or ostracizing others. A great example is how this story has a scene where the character has a vision and is uncertain whether it's divine intervention or a hallucination brought on by the plague. In either case, her fear is real because she knows she'll be labeled as cursed or lost to the plague in either case. The story also plays with the ambiguity of her experience really well. It leaves us with an ending that's open to interpretation. Here's an excerpt that I really enjoyed. The youngest gave a whispered thankful prayer to her savior, something she'd heard her parents say when the father came back with more than a single deer. The rain shower came to an abrupt stop. She opened her eyes and didn't recognize the crimson world around her. She didn't recognize her own scream as it ripped from her throat. She slipped and stumbled her way out of the blood-soaked fountain and began to distance herself from the tragic scene. The stone angel was still exactly as it had been when she'd arrived, save for the fresh sanguine stains soaking into the porous channels. A portrait of unholy misery. A beautiful, atmospheric, and haunting tale. This is actually the second story I've read from this author, but I'm quickly becoming a big fan of Hylia's work. Second this week is Heads for Sale by Jared Lambert. This is a story inspired by a note from Patricia J.L., which read, "I sold 3 heads today at work. They were styrofoam, but let's ignore that tiny detail." Knowing this, I was eager to dive in. There's even narration here as well, and honestly, it's excellent. The story is an excellent blend of comedy and horror, taking place in a food truck that serves food to zombies. The writing is sharp, and the dialogue has an excellent sense of humor. I loved some of the more gruesome details as well. It's a piece written with a really strong writing voice, and when you combine that with the great narration that you can listen to, it's a standout production. I also loved the premise, as it's just wacky enough to be believable, while also being unsettling thanks to all the gory details. It's great stuff. Here's an excerpt that I enjoyed. The undead horde spread out before them. Hundreds, thousands, or more. They were like the stars, too many to count. The smell of their rot filled the air in their lungs. A reek that had claws that clamped onto the tongue and refused to let go. The boy said something, but Des couldn't hear it.
"Speak up! You gotta yell to be heard over the buzzing."
Des pointed to the dark cloud of flies that swarmed over the walking dead. "Grande!" Des nodded.
"Good. Now get the payment."
I don't think it has money. It's not wearing any clothes." Des rolled his eyes and turned to the dead man. At least he assumed it used to be a man. Any markers of sex had long since rotted away.
"Hey!"
he said, pounding against the rebar to catch the thing's attention.
"Pay up!"
So good. I love this story. Check it out, and listen to the narration as well if you can. Third this week is The Rope by Philip Slater. This is a short story about a man in prison who's set to be hanged the following morning. In the story, he thinks back to the night where everything changed. It's a powerful piece, and one that had me sympathizing with the main character. In the story, he seems to have almost accepted his fate, but once I knew his story, I was firmly on his side. These things are rarely black and white, despite what the law may say. It's a very poignant piece, and it has a haunting ending. I also loved how it used historical photographs throughout to build the setting and the time period as well. It's a well-constructed and very well-written piece. Here's an excerpt that I enjoyed. Sometimes you can just sense trouble. It comes at you on the breeze like an early warning system. "Give us a chip."
"Get your own,"
my father replied, the drink emboldening him beyond his usual placid nature. With that, the smallest of the 3 reached out and knocked father's chips from his hands. They fell to the floor, almost apologetically, as he tried and failed to hold on to the newspaper they were wrapped in. I don't want to spoil anything, so I kept this excerpt short, but that's a great example of how the writing flows, and it's a really good short story, so check it out at the link in the show notes. Fourth this week is The Forest That Blinks Back by Artemis. This one was done for Luna Astley Kolsu's 30 Days of Fantasy Challenge. It's a beautifully grim fantasy story that starts with a disappearance and quickly turns into something much darker. I loved the use of the phrase, "the forest blinks back," throughout the story. It's a powerful piece of foreshadowing that really pays off when you get to the final act. The atmosphere in this piece was palpable as well. The forest has a presence that positively leaps off the page. The final revelations are shocking and satisfying in equal measure. with an ending that fits the truths of this world. Honestly, this is one of my favorite dark fantasy stories I've read in a long time. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. That was how he knew there was something with him in that darkness. That was how, even in the deep dimness, he met the pale, glittering eyes that watched him from across the room. Lucas cursed, stumbled back, but the eyes did not blink, and he realized it was not him that they watched at all. They were fixed on the window just behind him, on the forest Lucas knew grew at its edges, tall and shadowed as spires at this time of night. His eyes sharpened until he could distinguish a thin, stooped silhouette in the deep green shadows. Elder Ethel? The elderly woman did not move, nor did she blink, but her lips parted, and the words she uttered chilled Lucas's skin.
The forest blinks back, child. It blinks back.
Lucas fumbled his way out of the room, and even as he left, throwing a look back, Elder Ethel's eyes stayed pale and unblinking, glittering with a manic sort of terror. Woo! That's some exquisite writing. And it's an even better story. You'll love it, I know, so check it out. Link in the show notes. Fifth this week is Telluria's Awakening Part 2 by Kira Finley. This is a follow-up to Kira's story she did for one of my power-up prompts, and it continues to build out the world of her Jade Dreamer trilogy that's coming in the future. The last story introduced us to the Blood Eater, which was an absolutely terrifying and incredibly done villain. The story picks up right where it left off, and we get even more insight into the magic of this world, which is truly a spectacular element. There's a richness to the imagery and the world building in these stories that has me really excited for the Jade Dreamer trilogy. The use of higher dimensions and dream realms means that we get these really beautiful lines throughout the story, in addition to the horrors of things like the Blood Eater itself. Here's an excerpt that I really enjoyed. She slammed her eyes shut, but felt no fire. Liquid coolness reached her skin and she dared to peek. She was in space, floating through an endless sea of stars, one with them. The cool sea of plasma waving through her awareness like the gentle song of the mother she'd never known. A shooting star streamed so close she reached out to touch it. No hands appeared, only streaks of starlight reaching other streaks of starlight, touching in sacred symphony. Several planets hummed in the distance. She thought she recognized one. From behind, a force began pulling her, magnetic, irresistible, more powerful than the strongest sun, pulling her into nothing. Whew! So good. Grab some time to catch up if you need to, and then dive into this world that Kira's building, and you'll quickly find yourself lost in it like I have. And hey, thank you again to everyone who submitted links this week. Remember, your stories also have a chance to be featured on Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast as well. And of course, you can always find a link to these stories in the episode's show notes, so if you liked what you heard throughout this segment, check the show notes and you'll find links to everything. Alright, let's move on to this week's Level 3 Power-Up Prompt Stories. In this segment, I shout out Level 3 Power-Up Prompt Stories from this week's prompt, which was number 5. Power-Up prompts are published every Saturday, which gives you 3 elements to use in your story and a genre. The elements include a character, a conflict, and a setting. If you use all 3, you get a shout out right here on the show in this segment. And in this segment, I'll focus on what makes each story unique in the way that it used the prompt. So, let's dive in and see what this week's Power-Up Prompt Level 3 stories look like. First up is Living Hearts by Ashes of Love Poetry. I was really excited to read this piece, because honestly, I've been inspired by this poet's work recently since I discovered it. She creates poems that have this unrelenting pace and rhythm, but they also manage to tell a rich story and develop characters along the way as well. And this piece is no different. It weaves between ethereal and dreamlike lines while also moving the story forward and cleverly using all 3 elements of this week's romance prompt. There's some truly standout lines as well, so I highly recommend it. Second this week is one of 2 stories from Mary Ellen Brady, and this one is The Last Star's Garden. This one is unique because it's set in Mary Ellen's Starlight Cove universe, which honestly is easily in my top 10 fictional settings. This piece begins at a monumental and cosmic scale, but it somehow manages to preserve Mary Ellen's signature cozy and whimsical style. You'll also find how such a grand scope can possibly connect to the island of Starlight Cove in this story as well, but patience, dear reader. The connection will come as you read, and it's as glorious as you would hope. Next up this week is Margaritaville by Noah Beltran. I loved this piece because it immediately introduces us to an alternate version of the world we know, and it sets the stakes high by expertly introducing the end of the world element from the prompt. Not only that, but the dialogue and chemistry between the characters is spot on. I love the banter, I love the nostalgic tone to their lines. It's honestly a bittersweet piece that captures the essence of the prompt in a truly unique style. I really liked it. Next this week is That's a Wrap by Richard Pack. Now, this story sort of went in its own direction, so it may not technically be a level 3, but hey, you know what? I'm going to allow it this time, because as soon as I read it, I really wanted to include it in this week's Power Up Prompts section. You see, most of Richard's work that I've read is firmly planted in the realm of fantasy, which is why this story taking place on a film set took me by surprise. It's indeed a romance, but it weaves this beautiful meta-narrative, where it blurs the line between the actors, the script, and the story that transcends the one that they're filming. Honestly, it's a beautiful piece, especially the moment when both the actors in the story go off script and you know that they're off script. From there, the story takes on a life of its own, and honestly, it had me enraptured the entire time. I really believed in the chemistry between the two characters. It's just beautifully done, and I really wanted to mention it so people could check it out. It's amazing. Our fifth power-up prompt story this week is Another Sunrise by Artemis. I loved this one because it's actually an older story that Artemis reworked for this week's prompt. They incorporated all the elements as well in beautiful fashion, so it hits that level 3 milestone. My favorite thing with this piece was the chemistry between the characters. There's a genuine care and concern woven into their dialogue that made me feel their connection. Not only that, but it made the struggles they went through for each other entirely believable. Next this week is The Rise of the Floating Isles Part 2 by Kaylee Robison. This one was a very pleasant surprise because I loved the first story in this series, and with this second entry, Kaylee adds a huge amount of depth to the world while also managing to hit all 3 elements of this week's power-up prompt. The amount of planning and forethought it would take to satisfy both those goals makes my head spin, but hey, she got it done. This feels like a marvelous continuation of the story as well. And of course, we once again get to enjoy Kaylee's signature characters and dialogue, both of which leap off the page every time I read her work. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out what she's doing here on Substack, really take the time, it's amazing. Moving right along, we've got Mary Ellen's second power-up prompt this week, which is Written in the Margins. This one was somehow better than her first, if you can believe it. It also has a sort of cosmic kind of setting, but in this case we're in a library, where entire universes are ended when their stories are finished. Our character finds herself here after slipping through a crack in reality, and quickly makes contact with one of the cosmic beings that runs the library, and they immediately forge a connection. The stakes rise quickly, until our universe is the one on the chopping block, and this leads to some really stunning lines that honestly gave me chills. Lines like, what if stories never really ended, just found new ways to begin? Or, what if the spaces between stories were the most important parts? Honestly, every time I read one of Mary Ellen's stories, I become just a little bit more convinced that magic is real. And honestly, if it is, it's sitting right here in the pages of her work. Absolutely stunning. Next this week is Wandering Soulmates by James Mays. Since James is known for paranormal stories, this one leans right into their style by telling us a story about 2 spirits who meet in a place called the Garden. What I loved about this piece was how James leveraged their conversation to reveal the way that each spirit died, and in doing so helped us better understand them and the journey they went on thus far. It also helps endear us to both of them very quickly, which makes the connection they share all the more believable. I also love a good paranormal romance, so this is yet another amazing entry into this week's prompt. Also, while this story stands on its own in my opinion, James also asked me to specify that this comes from the Garden series, which is about a living garden that brings lost spirits to 2 mediums who help them find their way home. So check out the story and consider that context when you jump in, but like I said, I think it works well on its own. Alright, and our next power-up prompt story this week is Lady of the Lake by Mina Howell. This is a side story set in the world of Mina's ongoing Ophiocordyceps series, which is amazing, and if you haven't checked it out yet, you really need to. What I loved about this piece, though, was how it carved out its own place in her apocalyptic universe. It tells a bittersweet story about a connection shared between a spirit of the lake and a young woman. I won't spoil how things develop, but suffice to say, this one had me in tears by the end. It leverages each element of the prompt extremely well, and it adds a richness to Mina's Ophiocordyceps universe that I really enjoyed. And our final power-up prompt story this week is The End of Was by L.G. Wells. As a fellow cosmic horror writer, I was really excited to see that L.G. posted something for this prompt. He and I are very similar, so we naturally both took this week's romance prompt in a cosmic horror direction. But I have to give credit where it's due, L.G.'s story really takes the win here. Obviously, power-up prompts are not a competition, but in this case, LG's take on cosmic horror romance knocks mine out of the park. He brings a gentleness to the narration and dialogue that really caught me off guard. After all, I expect harsh imagery and kind of rough dialogue and narration from cosmic horror, as anyone would, but his approach here is more poetic and eloquent, which actually plays really well into the romance angle of this week's prompt. The story also brilliantly ties the end of the world element from the prompt into the characters' relationship, which honestly is nothing less than a stroke of genius. In this case, their love would literally cause reality to unravel, and those are the stakes we're dealing with here. It's a heart-wrenching piece that is not only beautifully written, it's one of my favorite stories that LG's ever done. Check the show notes for a link to this one and all of this week's power-up prompt stories. And let me tell you, if you're a romance fan, you got some really good reading to add to your list this week. And again, thank you to everyone who participates in the power-up prompts. We've only been doing them for 5 weeks, but I mean, it just keeps growing and growing. And honestly, I really appreciate it. And hey, down the road, I'm still going to do a 30-day prompt challenge like I'm known for. But in the meantime, I love the excitement and enthusiasm that I'm seeing on these weekly prompts. So thank you again to everyone who submitted. And I hope you enjoyed your shout-outs on the show. And again, you'll find all the links in the show notes. All right, next up is our weekly writing discussion. So this week, I want to talk about the struggles that happen outside our stories. I myself have grappled with stress and mental health issues my whole life. Honestly, the last couple of years have been really, really hard for me. It's hard to keep up the energy to write and stay creative, but honestly, when I'm not writing or being creative, I become a shell of myself. A zombie, if you will. I'm sure many of you will resonate with this, but I need to write. I have to be creative. But the question then becomes, how do I do that when it feels like I'm exhausted and drowning all the time? I don't have the answer. But I also think that there's not a single answer either. Different approaches work for different situations and different people, and honestly, the true answer, it comes from balance and a combination of several things. As always, I knew that when I encountered a topic like this, that if I were to ask the community, it would yield an abundance of answers that could help not only me, but people listening to the show as well. So, I put out a call for help. I asked writers to tell me how they keep themselves going when life is hard. How do they push through? And so for this week's writing discussion, I'd like to read the answers that I received. Starting first, Connie Nash says, "Glad you asked. I finally washed up at home on duties with family, 6 cats, friends, and normal house duty, along with writing practices and real actual writing. Like many of us, I'm consumed night and day with hating the horrific killing and starvation of total innocents in Gaza and other related parts of the world. So, I'm making myself spend part of every day on all of the above. Most rewarding so far is reading and writing via Julia Cameron's Write for Life. I feel it's her best work. And personalizing the times she learned to listen for guidance and apply what she hears. Not yet caught up at all with the rest of my life, yet experiencing guidance and more real peace and openness to people and cats in my life." So yes, I think it's really good. The tip here is to look for something that inspires you and look for guidance, which is why I like to do my articles on writing. In this case, Connie mentions a book by Julia Cameron called Write for Life. So honestly, I would recommend checking that out. It sounds like it's got some great advice. Mina Howell is next up, and she responded by saying, "I also write to escape, but I write things worse than they are to show myself that everything really is okay, that I survived, or that I will." This one's really good. Perspective is incredibly important as writers, and we can give ourselves that perspective by working through some of the things we're dealing with in our stories and remembering that we've survived worse in the past. So great advice from Mina. Tara Deacon says, "Honestly, I push forward by writing, but I write what wants to be written, not what I want to be written. Basically, turning my disappointment, my frustration, and my struggle into somewhat decent writing. It helps me feel better creating something. I also make tea. I often will cry while I write. And I talk to the moon in the crazy hours of the early morning like it's my best homie. Not joking, I mean I actually do that for real. LOL. It's me venting out loud and no one can hear me. I crack a lot of jokes. It helps me to laugh out my problems. I don't feel as stressed by doing that. And I write some really off-the-wall pieces that push the boundaries of socially acceptable. I also lead a really rich fantasy and imaginative life, and it helps me push forward by finding beauty in little things like wishing trees, cherry blossoms, old music, thrift store treasures. Sometimes I remind myself that I've made it through worse shit than this. I'm going to make it because I don't have any other options. And when I can't push myself forward, I just chill out and rest to gain some more traction. Rest can be really vital for emotional survival. Like, if I'm struggling, I will give myself a PJ day all day if I need it. And I won't be sorry either. I'm such a rebel. LOL. So there's a lot of really good stuff in there. When it comes to, kind of hitting that wall, for me, for example, I struggle a lot with burnout. So when it comes to hitting that wall, it really is important to give yourself time to rest. I often like to say that rest isn't something you have to earn, it's something you deserve, right? And so everybody's got their own way of kind of disconnecting and, resting. And for, Tara here, it's all about tea. It's all about, some of her hobbies. And of course, just having a day where you're in your PJs all day. I love that. And so the last part's really important too. Don't be sorry about it. Like I said, you deserve rest. So again, when you're feeling, down or you're having trouble writing, it's important to just take a break. It doesn't have to be a permanent break. It can just be something where you take a step back, and that will allow you to reset. Next up, Artemis says, it's the little things. Trying out a local cafe or buying a pretty drink or a beautiful edition of a book or nightly walks. I write to escape, like so many others, and it's one of the only things keeping my stress at bay these days. The idea that my life is just a story, and it's not even half as horrifying as the stories I write, is comforting sometimes. And that's really well said, and it comes back to what Mina said as well. Perspective is important. And honestly, I love that. Think of your life like a story, right? You are in control. You're the writer of your story in your life and the stories that you write that are fiction as well. Next up, Mary Ellen Brady says, this year has nearly crushed me. The lowest of my life has been the last 12 months. Yet it is the most words I've ever written and shared too. And as I write that sentence, I realize I do not want that to be my norm. And that is a new fear. Writing is how I process. Not only the escape, but how I process all the emotion. And again, that's something that seems to be coming up, and I totally agree. Writing can be an extremely therapeutic act. And as a result, you should lean into it. You should use it to process stuff. It's healthy. And when you write stories like that, you help other people process as well because they can resonate with it. Next up, Victor Jimenez says, I write to make sense of things. I go over the different options in my head, and the writing captures what I thought and what I worked out. That's why my writing is usually about something. And again, great point from Victor. Using your writing to work through things and work things out is great. And it's a very valid approach when you feel like the stress of life is getting to you. Next up, Jarrett Sharp says, for me, writing is how I manifest personal integrity. Writing is how I resonate authenticity. The ink speaks for me, and the pages just listen. They embrace the pain of my brother's recent suicide, the confusion of having to move, the fear of losing work in this economy, and the doubts of this middle-aged Gen Xer who seems to fall short in my daily life. My essays help me name my experiences. Maybe they will speak for me when my adult children decide my words are worthy of their time. I write because I listen to the call, my calling. I write because I am supposed to. I have developed strict habits, honed daily, much like any number of popular self-care movements that abound. I am a devout worshiper at the altar of pen and paper, often kneeling and listening to and for inspiration. Thank you so much to Jarrett for sharing that, and my deepest condolences for the loss of your brother. There is a lot of wisdom in this as well. It's one of those things where when life is out of control, writing can be one of those things where you feel like you do have control because you are the author. Like I said, you're the writer of your life and the writer of your stories. And if you can't control your life necessarily, you can absolutely control your stories. You are the one that created them. So, great advice here from Jarrett. Thank you again for sharing. Next up, Robert C. Worstel says, my solution is having a set time in place, then soldiering on. This, as a habit, trains your inspiration to be available at your call. A work ethic. Push your own angst aside and write the angst of your character instead. Good pieces of advice here. Building a habit of writing, I think, is an incredibly important aspect of being a long-term writer. You definitely want to have that habit kind of built in. And yes, there's going to be times where you need inspiration to kind of just show up, and sometimes when it just literally won't. However, it is more likely to appear when you need it if you have that habit going. So that's good advice there from Robert. Jimmy Daleson says, so I've had a tough spring of writing. Up until 6 weeks ago, I was a diplomat in East Africa. My wife got fired from USAID by Elon in early February, and the last couple months have just been a nightmarish struggle to figure out where we were even going to live. That's a big reason why my Substack stories are largely work I've already submitted to other contests. I've only had a couple of new projects going, and have actually turned my attention to writing FU op-eds to the local paper about politics as a way to process what I'm feeling. So yeah, I'm here. I'm keeping it going slowly but surely. Thank you so much to Jimmy for sharing, and honestly, that sounds like a lot, and I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. However, it sounds like you're going to land on your feet. I have total faith that you will, and I love that you're just keeping on with the writing, because honestly, that's the thing. Like Robert said, having that habit is really important, and it doesn't matter how many words you do. It really doesn't. What matters is that you're consistent. So Jimmy's showing up every single day, and that right there is great advice. Next up, Derek James Kritzberg says, I'm a soccer referee and made of different material than most people. The reality for me is butt in seat, hands on keyboard, right. But I still want to take a shot at answering this. There are definitely other things I slack on or hesitate with, and this works for me. Whenever I find myself hesitating doing the right thing, I sometimes mentally reframe, imagining I'm watching myself. Sometimes it helps to imagine being watched by someone you respect, or someone important who has high expectations of you. This reframe might stress some people out. It's not for everyone, but for me, it motivates me. Do the thing. What do you look like just sitting there compared to someone else who just gets on with it? That person should be capital U. I do this at small scales too. Yesterday, I took my kids to the pool and wanted to be brave getting back into the water. It's cold. That moment before jumping in, I knew I'd hesitate and make a poor example. So I pictured 1,000 expectant people in a stadium waiting for me, the ref, to blow the whistle and start the game. Something I've done 1,000 times. Jumping in some cold water has nothing on that. Problem solved. Dad jumped right in. As much as a person might claim otherwise, we all have our little amazing side we can draw strength from. Don't tuck that strength away in some forgotten category. Bring it out and do something with it. Yes! Great advice from Derek. Honestly, I love the idea of envisioning that someone is depending on you. It makes you hold yourself accountable. And as Derek said, it might be too much stress for some people, myself included possibly, but I love the concept. And like I said, that accountability is incredibly important. Great advice there. Next up, River says, writing is a way I can take a break from doom scrolling. When it's too much, I tell myself, write for just 20 minutes. I usually write for much longer and feel better after, even if the world is still a mess. Excellent advice from River, and I couldn't agree more. As we talked about, having that habit is really important. And what, can hold you back is trying to feel like you have to write so many words or for so much time each day. It's not really about that. Like I said, it's about the consistency. On a podcast that I listen to about writing, one of the hosts recommends that you just promise yourself you'll write a sentence a day. And what's going to happen is you're going to sit down and you're going to write that sentence, and more often than not, that sentence will lead to a paragraph and maybe a page or two. So just start small, like River says, 20 minutes. Just commit to that each day, and you'll be surprised how much progress you make. Next up, Kira Finley says, wow, I love this question/idea. I've had some incredibly low times recently, so I feel you. My why for writing is twofold. Illuminate truth and write the world as it could be. One of my mottos is writing a new myth for humanity. I honestly believe in our ability as writers to create a new world, and that keeps me going when I feel low or overwhelmed. Now, for the how, that varies. There are times when genuine triggers or unhealed parts of me are coming up and asking for tenderness and a break from the pressure I can tend to put on myself. In those moments, I believe it's important to step back and let those parts of me know they are safe, that they can rest. Usually, that just takes a day or two. So, I always find that after I've given myself that space, I come back to the page with so much more passion and clarity. Then there are those other times when it's just my ego trying to keep me safe by sabotaging my dreams. Those are the times when I tell myself, okay, we're going to give this a shot and see what happens. I sit down, and usually something ends up coming through, even if it isn't revolutionary or amazing. But those are moments I build trust with myself, and my ego begins to realize it isn't in charge, and it doesn't have to be. Knowing the difference between the two is tricky, and it takes a lot of self-awareness. But once you get to know your subconscious and the way it plays that game, that part gets easier. Some absolutely amazing advice there from Kira. I love so much of this here. I love the mental aspect between whether or not it's you needing to rest or if it's the ego. That's incredibly valuable advice there. Trying to learn that difference is huge. And then also, as Kira said, it's times when you need to understand the difference between the two and when it's time to rest. And just like Kira says, it only takes a day or two sometimes. But you need to be able to give yourself that break. So I would highly recommend checking out some of the stuff Kira said here and really diving deep into that analysis about how your subconscious manifests and when it might be holding you back unnecessarily. Next up, Noah Beltran says, "You're highlighting a worry for me. So I wrote pretty regularly for many years until 2022 when I took on a big job, university department chair that involved an accreditation application. I stopped writing my usual stuff until this past May, and it was mainly because I was on sabbatical since December. I'm already grieving my freedom because I'm back to the grind in mid-August. I don't want to stop writing, but I'm afraid I might. I hope to hear some good tips." So Noah pulls out a very valid concern here, especially when you've been out of work and you're about to get back into work like Noah's talking about here. It's a valid fear, but let's go back to what Kira was saying, right? Is that the ego, right? Trying to say, "Oh, you're just not going to have enough time and energy to do both these things." Who knows, right? I'm not in Noah's shoes, but one thing I will say is that I am someone who works a full-time job. Yes, I work from home, but I work a full-time job, and I still do all this stuff on Substack as well. And it's really hard some days because it takes a lot of energy. It's really like working full-time jobs, 2 full-time jobs. However, with Noah's case here, my advice is just to, take into account what Kira and others have said thus far in this segment, really take it to heart, and remember, like I've been saying, you don't have to write, a novel a month, right? You don't even have to write a post a month if you don't want to. Find what schedule and pace works for you. Look for those little opportunities, like our other person said, River, I believe, said, take 20 minutes. That's doable, even if you are working a full-time job. So I know it's easier said than done, but don't stress it. You will find the time to write, and you will be able to maintain that on top of your new position once you get, comfortable in that new job. So that's my advice to Noah. And again, I think a lot of the advice that everybody else has been saying also applies. Next up, Asteria Geisterblum says, "I liked this one to come back to it when I have more time on my hands and then forgot, which just sums up my answer in the end. When things get difficult in life, I just push ahead. Pretty much the German way of do it until you can't feel it and make sure to smile. Which is super unhealthy, and I wouldn't recommend it. Life being difficult doesn't affect my creative flow. I can still write, but it absolutely ruins my focus when it comes to the other necessary tasks like editing and proofreading. Just sitting down to plan a scene or note down the needed changes is impossible. I can't sit still enough, and if I do, my mind isn't still enough. I handle it with doing lots of sports to be tired enough to want to sit down, and then I stop the time for how long I can focus, and then continue to make sure that I only edit in the possible time frame, usually 7 to 12 minutes. That usually tricks my brain enough, but of course, life isn't just tough for one day, so this process and the constant lack of focus gets incredibly draining if it goes on for too long." Really, really good points here from Asteria, and I appreciate this answer here because honestly, finding the time is one thing, but having the mental energy or the stillness to do it is a whole different battle. So I really like what Asteria said here about looking for ways, like in this example, sports or like physical activity or doing another hobby that you like enough to stimulate your brain so that you're not dealing with all that excess nervous energy when you sit down. I think that's a really, really good piece of advice there. Next up, James Mays says, "How do you push forward when things get difficult? I usually don't. ADHD on top of a post-stroke brain causes me to quit most of the time. I've struggled for years to get writing again after the stroke, but so far it hasn't been too successful. I've deleted 7 WordPresses, 4 Mediums, and 3 Substack accounts in the past 5 years because I go through phases where when things get bad, I quit for a month or 2 and come back with a different outlook, hating my current topic. I wish I could stick with something more than 6 months. Does the stress of life make it difficult to write? Actually, for me, no. It makes it difficult for me to write on one topic. I'll be political for 6 months and write 100 political articles. Then health goes down and I delete the political blog and switch to a health writing blog for 6 months. Then I go to poetry. Then I go to lifestyle. Then I go to dark fiction. It's actually kind of frustrating." Yeah, James, I definitely understand what you're saying there. It can be one of those things, I always say that it's important to have more than one project going at once because if you try to focus too hard on one project over and over and over again, you'll burn yourself out. And that doesn't even take into account some of the other things that you personally are dealing with. So it makes sense that you kind of switch topics as a way to sort of refresh yourself. It's one of those things where I can't tell any single writer what their topic is, their niche, their thing that they should focus on, but I do think you will find it. And I think when you do find one that you're enjoying, I would recommend, having a few projects within that niche going simultaneously. Not too many, but enough to where if you're starting to feel that burnout, you can switch to another project or kind of jump to whatever you're feeling inspired by without necessarily changing topics. But I understand where you're coming from here and I appreciate you sharing. Next up, Melanie Cole says, writing gives structure to my life. I live with something called schizoaffective disorder, so my life can get pretty unstable at times. But writing wherever I am gives me something to accomplish, even if it's only a short poem. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm long past placing that expectation on myself. But it's a small thing I can accomplish. Those little wins are huge for me, and writing is that. Great input from Melanie here. And that's the thing, the one of the podcasts that I listened to about writing, that the same one I referenced earlier, one of the hosts, actually says that, finishing a book, or in this case, a poem or a short story, will give you a sense of satisfaction that no one can take away. Even if you never publish it, you'll know that you finished it. And I think that right there is something that a lot of people can use to motivate themselves. So that's really good advice from Melanie. Next up, Rachel Tribble says, writing is a way for me to distract myself from personal and global chaos. It's also a way for me to figure out questions I struggle with. The stories mean whatever they do to readers, but I can look back and see the dreams I'm working out. Maps I'm making to rebuild parts of my life that have collapsed. The place where I got tired and where I found myself again. Countering the block is never easy. Procrastination creeps in and I can't find the words to describe what I'm seeing in my mind. I ask the story to reveal itself, but it goes quiet. All I can do is keep trying, even if it takes me 3 days to write 200 words. Sometimes it's not about speed. I struggle with letters and how they form words and my mind spins. All I can do is remind myself that it's not gone, the story is somehow working itself out in my mind, and if I don't give up, I will find my way back and the story will be better. But it's also hard to do that, and I often find my inner struggle and anxiety gets worse. It's a forever war with myself, and I just sit outside with the trees and hope I find my way. Yeah, Rachel, I definitely resonate with that. I think the term forever war is beautiful and poetic there, and very, very true. As someone, myself who's struggled with anxiety and other mental health issues my whole life, it's a constant battle. And, writing is an act that takes energy, and sometimes we just don't have the energy. So that's where it becomes important to recognize when it's time to rest. And to your point, even if it takes 3 days to write 200 words, that's still progress. So, as you said, it's not always about speed. Great input there from Rachel. And that's it for this week's writing discussion. Some truly incredible answers here from the community and a lot of great advice. I spotted a few things myself that I can use to keep going. And once again, I have to say thank you to the community for their sheer support every time I reach out with a question like this. Your willingness to share your thoughts and your experiences is really not only helping me, but a lot of other people as well, and I hope you know that. I'll add a link also to an article that I did about writing through the stress in the show notes with some of my own inputs, but honestly, after hearing all these stories, I'm thinking that a new article down the road is in order where we kind of combine this amazing input into a piece that people can check out that way if they don't necessarily listen to the podcast. Time will tell, but I'm going to keep that in mind. All right, next up is this week's guest interview. This week, I'm very excited to welcome to the show a fantasy author who has already published an entire book here on Substack and is well on his way into a second book. Not only that, but he just published a collection of poetry from his fantasy universe on Amazon recently as well. I am, of course, referring to the great Anthony Lee Phillips, who I had the pleasure of interviewing for this week's episode. In this interview, Anthony shares some absolutely stellar insight into his writing style and what inspired him to work on his current series. So without further ado, let's get into this week's interview with fantasy author Anthony Lee Phillips. All right, everybody, and this week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm extremely excited to welcome to the show a fantasy author by the name of Anthony Lee Phillips. Anthony, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Bradley. Love it.
So for my first question here, would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Yeah, so I'm a fantasy author. I write super weird, epic poetic fantasy. My background actually is in, like my story training, I guess you could say, is a little bit varied. I'm a self-taught guitarist. I've been playing guitar for 20 years, and the way that I learned is by writing songs. I've written about 400, 500 songs. And then I went to college for acting. And so when I say like epic poetic fantasy, I mean like I really do. I study Shakespeare and I study Homer and I study things like Gilgamesh and Hedwana, and I've gotten onto this big skaldic kick. I'm listening and reading a lot of Jackson Crawford, who translates the Poetic Edda, and he translates some of the old Norse sagas, and the poetic forms is what I'm really interested in. Like, what is the sort of metrical feel, the pulse, right? But also like Shakespeare, everyone thinks of Shakespeare as iambic pentameter, but the beautiful thing that Shakespeare did that sort of shows that he wasn't properly educated is he breaks all the rules all the time. Like a lot of his monologues, you think of the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow monologue, that soliloquy has like it's got like almost no form. It breaks the rules every single line because that guy hasn't slept in many weeks and his wife just killed herself. And so he's not sane, he's not doing well. And when as an actor you go into it, the rhythm of it is, she should have died hereafter. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. That's not da-dum 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 da-dum. That's there's nothing regular about it. That's Shakespeare. That's what Shakespeare can do with poetry. And so that's the kind of stuff that I use when I'm doing poetic fantasy. Once upon a moonful night, there was a girl who was an orc. She had gold slitted eyes and dark green skin. Her black hair, when light touched it, drank it in. And when she turned 11, she began to have true dreams. What I'm trying to do is set up a rhythm that I break a bunch later on in the chapter. So
Okay.
that's
No.
that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. No, I love that. Yeah, I as someone who will sometimes kind of weave poetry into my fiction, I love when other authors do that. And I love that you're kind of pulling from music experience as well. That's fantastic. So,
Yeah.
what came first then? Was it the music writing or was it like actual kind of fiction poetry writing? And did one lead to the other?
Well, so I was a musician before I was anything, right? I
Hmm.
used to play flute. I actually have, this is audio, I know, but I'm holding up an ocarina here. I've been
Hmm.
learning ocarina.
Yeah.
Flute was my first instrument, and I play a lot of guitar, right? But a few years ago, I got glasses and remembered how much I love to read. And I like burned through Dune, and then I read Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, which
Hmm.
if anybody hasn't read Who Fears Death, that's a masterpiece. She boiled that book down from 800 pages to 400 pages without cutting out any plot points.
Wow.
In half, like actually in half. And so some chapters are a page and a half long, but it's perfect. It's like
Mm.
a poem. It's prose, she's a prose writer, but and it's fantasy. It's somebody coming to fantasy who maybe hasn't read Tolkien. Someone who's coming to fantasy from a totally different background and thinks of things like shapeshifters as maybe a little different than you might expect, right? So Who Fears Death, after I read that book, I was like, I want to do this. I
Mm.
want to be a fantasy writer. And at first I was like, oh, I want to write a video game. And I tried 3 times to make something in Unity. And then I was like, okay, so I need to learn to code, and I don't want to do that.
Right.
I'll just write a book, and then eventually I'll meet a coder who will help me turn this into a game. So right now I'm just trying to burn through as many of the stories as I can that I've got in my head. I've got about 32 books on the pipeline, and I think the first like 19 I'm going to be able to get done by the end of 2028 is
Wow.
the goal. So if I get to that point and if I'm able to get any kind of traction, one of the first things that I want to do is turn Bakura's story. Bakura is not the main character, but
Hmm.
he's a main character in the world. I want to turn his story into a video game because he has a lot of the hero's journey, like classic Zelda, classic Dragon Age or Fire Emblem, vibe where it's like, oh, I've got this goal, and the goal is to get stuff in order to achieve this goal. And to get that stuff, I've got to kill things and kill people. And so it's like, oh, well, that would make a good video game, you know?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Very cool. Very cool. So do you see then, I'm just curious, do you see kind of this whole sort of series as like a transmedia type universe where it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you have the
Yeah, big
books, you got
time.
the game. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love transmedia universes. I'm trying to develop one myself, and I love the concept, right? Like a story that exists across
Mm.
mediums. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
so my vision, right, is like I I love Game of Thrones,
Hmm.
but I what I love more than Game of Thrones is that the first book, George Martin, his first award for Game of Thrones was actually, or A Song of Ice and Fire, sorry, it's still a Game of Thrones in my head,
Right.
but he got his first Game of Thrones award from the Dany book, the book that's just the Dany chapters.
Okay.
And I was like, dude, you should be doing that.
Mm.
Because if there was a book where it's just Bran chapters, That's what I would be studying. I would buy so many editions of that. Like as with Name of the Wind, I would have a version for reading that's for showing people, and then I would have a version that I could scribble in,
Mm.
and adapt so that it's like, all right, well, this is my adapters one, so that I can like if I'm ever bored somehow, I can adapt this to a screenplay or for or an animation screenplay or something. And so I went into my series with that in mind, where
Okay.
it's like, okay, like Nala is my main flagship. Her saga is my main flagship. And that's like poetic fantasy. When the magic happens, it turns into poetry. Like PG-13-ish, there's some violence, but it's not really about the violence.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the emotional experience. And
Right.
then, my magic system is based on the Enneagram, which I can go into later. But the idea is that like your emotions are where your magic comes from. And
Mm.
so the key in Nala Saga, which begins with Moonthread, is emotions and knowing yourself and getting to know yourself and what not knowing yourself can do to damage you,
Mm.
right? In each book, it's very much about her knowing herself and having empathy, but also understanding that you can't always trust everybody.
Mm.
Versus Bakura, who has that, the kill people, get stuff. He was a child soldier, and his stuff is grimdark.
Mm.
And I was like, I don't want those grimdark chapters in Nala's story, even if they're happening at the same time.
Okay.
So what I did is I made, all right, well, Nala's story is going to be one genre, and then Bakura's story is going to be another genre, and then there's another character named Paka, and his story, I'm going to turn all of his shit into. Oh, can I curse on this podcast?
That's fine. Yeah, you're fine. Hmm.
Okay, sorry. I can turn Paka's adventures into D&D material, or like Draw Steel or Daggerheart or whatever it is. So like I have all of these custom caster classes that I've made because it's based on the Enneagram, and so like each of the little gods is a type on the Enneagram, and it gives you magic. And so Paka's Atlas, Paka's Codex, whatever I'm going to call it, that'll have all of the stat blocks if I'm like, okay, well, I really want to make a shadow mage, or man, I really, really want to play a sun-kissed witch who is like a warlock to the fire god, or I really want to worship the spore goddess and make potions and cast jinxes and hexes and curses on people. Well, that's all going to be in Paka's Atlas.
Mm.
That's all going to be in Paka's Codex, and that's actually I just released Orc Lore, which is a collection of Orcish poetry about the gods,
Mm.
and that's technically going to be a part of Paka's Codex.
Okay.
So that's the idea with the multimedia thing of like each of these characters. I'll eventually get to this cozy series that's like it's going to be about this war surgeon that doesn't want to be in war anymore, and
Mm.
all that the books are is her going to different villages and then doing surgery on animals. It's going to be
Mm.
like a cozy veterinary rescue
Wow.
series with magical animals.
Yeah.
So like different heroes for different genres.
Okay. That's fantastic. That last one with the kind of cozy fantasy thing, I can absolutely picture the audience for that. I can think of a few people on Substack alone that would love that. So
Yeah.
that's great. No,
Yeah.
I love that you're branching out that way into kind of subgenres of fantasy. That's amazing. So, kind of rewinding the clock a bit here, you know, when you first decided that you wanted to be, kind of a writer in the sense that you're writing fiction and poetry, do you recall your very first story that you ever wrote? And was it related or did it evolve into what
Mm.
you're doing now by any chance?
No, not so much. I mean, and a side note, eventually I do want to ask you about your multimedia universe too. I'll answer this question, but just know I'm going to be flipping that question back on you.
Okay, fair.
Just get ready. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, so my mom had me when she was really young. My mom was 15 when she had me. And for the first, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of my life, I lived with my grandma. And my
Mhm.
grandma was pretty young too. And my grandma actually went to school for video game design.
Mhm.
And so like I used to watch her play video games. And when I was a teenager, I made this story with my grandma that was like, the Vampirian Angel, Edgelord,
Mhm.
extraordinaire. Um, and that always got me thinking because like the idea of it actually came from an image. It just came from an image in my head. And you'll see this pop up over and over again. Like when I teach writing, I'm very image focused. I
Mhm.
want to be able to see it. I want it to be visceral. And that's what I think that Shakespeare's real superpower was, using phrases to make you see things.
Okay.
You
Yep.
know, like that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew.
Mm.
Right? That is a powerful image, and that's Hamlet's first line, first real line,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
telling us like, I want to die. But he doesn't say I want to die. He's like, I want my flesh to disintegrate.
Right.
Or you think of like, I mean, King Lear is the best example of like blow winds, crack your cheeks, where he's storming at the storm, or Romeo and Juliet, but soft but light through yonder window breaks. It is the east and Juliet is the sun. It's a light turning on, and he's like, wow, there she is. That's
Mm.
the sun. That's my sun. That's my North Star. That's what gives me life, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I made this story with my grandma, it was this image of this robed figure, and he's like a vampire, and he's like a half vampire because he's in daylight, but he's in this black shroud, and it's ragged and it's windy, but it's snowing. And he's
Mm.
got this huge white wolf next to him. And he's just kind of like sad, alone in the snow.
Mm.
And that image, that was my first taste, right, of this kind of fiction storytelling, where it's like I want it to be visceral. I want the image to have enough emotion that I don't have to tell you what's going on. In acting, there's this guy named Michael Chekhov, and he was Stanislavski's best student, but he never did anything Stanislavski said.
Mm.
Stanislavski is all about why, and Michael Chekhov is like, why is important, but it's also unattainable.
Mm.
Why doesn't actually help me as a practitioner. How tells me why.
Mm. Okay.
So, and I take that into everything, right? Yeah, and the example that he gives is like, let's say in the scene, I'm playing somebody who's gonna walk into a room, shoot somebody, and then run out,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, if that person walks in slowly, finds their target, raises the gun fast, shoots, and then runs, that's a totally different story than if they run in, see somebody, slow down, shoot them, and then in the midst of all the chaos, they sulk away. That's a totally different why.
Mm.
You get and like it sounds the same telling you, but I can see it in my head. And when you see it on stage, like there's a play by Samuel Shepard where at the end he describes the stage direction is like he takes a knife to a screen door and he cuts a vertical slit and then he crawls through.
Mm.
But the thing is, like what he's doing is he is birthing himself into hell.
Mm.
And all that it says is cut a vertical slit and crawl through, but it's a screen door, so it folds open, so it looks a little provocative,
Right.
right? And it looks horrible. It looks horrible. It looks like hell.
Yeah.
And so like I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but like those are the seeds that sort of were planted for my style.
Right.
In terms of like where the story itself was born, it's there are lots of different tendrils that I can talk about. Is that more your question where it's like where did the idea for the story come from
Yeah,
or
that was kind of my next follow-up question. I like where you took your last answer in terms of direction because the reason I ask about kind of people's first stories is I want to know like where their style evolved from. So
yeah.
you hit the nail on the head there. And yeah, my follow-up question would be like, what led you to fantasy and by extension your current
Hmm.
project. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Bum bum bum.
Yeah, yeah.
Da-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da.
I spotted
So
that shirt. Yeah.
yeah. So when I was my first introduction to fantasy was like when I was 7, my mom got me an N64 and both the Zelda games and both Zelda guides. And I was like not good at this, right? I got Ocarina of Time and I got Majora's Mask. I was not good at these games. But what I did is I played them like a book.
Okay.
Played them like a book. And so what I would do is I would go into every nook and every cranny. I went through the guidebook and I said, that looks cool. I have a couple pages to get there though, so I'm just gonna do everything all in order. And in the guidebooks they had little things about what these characters might say or where they came from, or it was like a wiki.
Right.
And in Ocarina of Time, that was really cool. And then when I got to Majora's Mask is like a next level creation,
Yeah.
and it's not for everyone, right? But it was for me. It
Yeah.
was very much for me. And this idea of like you're in this constant loop, but because you're in this constant loop, you can't do everything.
Hmm.
you cannot do everything in 3 days. There's just no way,
Right.
like not even close. And so while, maybe through like I played Ocarina of Time 7 times through, and
Mm.
I played Majora's Mask 4 times through because
Hmm.
it took me a lot longer. But I think in the third playthrough, I was like, wow, I really like while I'm in the middle of doing this quest, this person is dying.
Mm. Hmm.
And so like I can't save them and do this other thing at once. And so that gave me this sort of intuitive sense of what a midpoint is supposed to do. It
Mm.
gave me an intuitive sense of like, you know, there are dilemmas in the world where you can't pick every side.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah. One of my earliest gaming memories was I was in second grade when Ocarina of Time came out, and
Yeah.
I had to get my tonsils removed, so I was out of school for like a week, and in that week I was able to play Ocarina of Time for the first time. I was just in bed recovering, and I played Ocarina of Time, and that's just such a fond memory, and it's really really cool to hear your perspective on the games and what they brought to you, especially Majora's Mask because
Oh,
I agree that that one is so divisive as a Zelda game and as a work of art. And
yeah.
yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing. That's one of my favorite answers that I've
Well, and
heard.
I love, like there was some video on YouTube that was like um Majora's Mask is a Buddhist nightmare or something like that. And I love that. I love that video, and it
Yeah.
sort of put into words a lot of things that I had felt intuitively, and then it talked about the history of certain Buddhas. And so like the fierce deity is a Buddha. It's a
Right.
violent Buddha that there are these five violent Buddhas, and the fierce deity is like the strongest one, the leader.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is like it destroys things that are causing people suffering,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Yeah, I love that game so much. And I love the idea that like you watch your rupees disappear every time you go back in time. And
Right,
so
right.
like all that you're able to take with you are the things that you've done,
The
are
knowledge,
the things
right.
that you've accomplished. You take the masks, you take the ways that you've healed the world
Right,
with
right, right.
you, and that's
Right.
all that you have left. I love
That's
that.
amazing. That's amazing. This is a total side note, but I'm curious because we're talking about Majora's Mask and obviously that game's centered around a time loop. Have you ever played a more recent game called The Outer Wilds by any chance?
I have not, but I have been looking. I have actually seen a couple video essays on it, and I really want to play it. I
Okay,
really
yeah.
do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's an all-timer for me. I my first tattoo was from the Outer Wilds. That's how
Oh,
much that
sick.
game that's how much that game means to me. So I was yeah,
It's a good one.
knowing what I know about your love of Majora's Mask, I know you would like that one too. So I had to ask.
Yeah, I gotta check it out. And like, the sort of core surprise has been spoiled for me, but I like to say that there are no spoilers, only prophecies.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And I mean yeah, exactly. No, I love that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's one of those games where the story like it'll hit you in all kinds of ways as you're experiencing it, and it'll
Cool.
it'll stay with you too, which is the best part.
Yeah.
So yeah, so obviously gaming is a big inspiration for you. Same for me, so I love that. So how did all that inspiration lead to where you are now with Moon Thread with your series that you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I so the magic system is based on the Enneagram, which is like it's like a personality type thing.
Hmm.
I think that it's misused a lot. It's misused by a lot of MLMs and even cults.
Sure.
And I think that that sort of betrays like a pretty deep truth to it.
Mhm.
If something is used by a cult, it means that it probably shouldn't be true, but it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I had a conversation with somebody on Substack named Rube Draba, who was like, I he really hated that I have an emotion magic system. And I
Hmm.
was like, have you ever read Firestarter?
I don't think I have, no.
Firestarter by Stephen King. It's my favorite Stephen King book, but the premise of it is like you have a toddler and she has pyromancy.
Hmm.
And whenever she throws a tantrum, horrible, horrible, horrible fires happen.
Hmm.
And it's so good. And it's really about her dad trying to take care of her and save her from the government because it's Stephen King and psychic, he has some minor psychic powers, but um but mostly he's trying to take care of his daughter, who he loves, who, whenever she has a tantrum, it destroys the world.
Mm.
It destroys their lives. Really good book. Like all Stephen King books, it has kind of a fizzly ending.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but but I love that idea. And there's something so true about like when I think of a soft magic system that really, really works, um, I actually think of Avatar a
Mm.
lot, where
Hmm.
it's like you do these certain abilities, but really it's about emotions. It's about being able to access certain emotions. Aang can't firebend because he can't let himself get angry,
Right. Right.
right? And the idea of the Enneagram, the sort of core concept of it is you've got 9 types, Ennea.
Hmm.
I like to call them stress types. So it's like
Mm.
the personality type of your amygdala. Okay, and they're core coping mechanisms. But rather than begin with the 9 types, you begin with the triad. So there's a triad of reactions that your amygdala has.
Hmm.
And this is true for all people. This is the sort of emotional version of fight, flight, make friends, freeze, hide, whatever.
Mm.
And that's fear, anger, embarrassment.
Mm.
Fear, anger, and embarrassment. And each of those has 3 branches in the Enneagram, is the idea.
Okay.
But in the core triads, how do you respond to stress? Well, and I like to say that it's a stack. A lot of people will say you are only one type of the Enneagram, and I think that's total bullshit.
Mm.
Like we all get afraid, we all get angry, and we all get embarrassed.
Mm.
But it's a stack, and to be a stack, only one can be on top,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you have all like in each of those triads, you have one that's sort of in denial of itself, and then you have 2 other coping mechanisms, right? And so I'm a type 9, and type 9 is the pushover, the peacekeeper, the person who says like, I'll erase myself to make sure that I don't lose any friends. I'm so afraid of being alone that I would rather be invisible than be alone.
Mm. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And you would think that that would be like an embarrassment thing or a fear thing, but that's actually an anger type. So the whole idea is like I never get angry because anger pushes people away. And so you become asleep to your anger. You push it down, you push it out, and then what happens is leakage. So like that's why you have somebody who never gets angry, never gets angry, never gets angry, and then someone messes up the onions on your burger and you're screaming in the middle of a cafe.
Hmm.
This is a type 9. This is a type 9 personality. And when I was coming up with Nala, on a practical writing level, I was like, the story is largely about empathy. And so I made Nala as different from me in every way as I possibly could make her. And then I said, but I'm going to make her my same type. So when she gets stressed out, I know exactly how she'd react because that's how I would react.
Mm.
Right. Um, in terms of like where Nala came from, I like to say that Nala is like Gandalf if Gandalf was Harry Potter's age, 11, and if he was a she, and if she was an orc.
Right.
And so that's Nala, where it's like, all right, well, instead of being an avatar of fire, which Gandalf is, Nala is an avatar of shadow and of moon and of merging. And
Mm.
I said, how can I turn the type 9 personality into a magic system? All right, like if the type 9 goddess gives Nala powers, what are those powers going to be? And so what I came up with is this moon goddess who gives her the power of shadows, where it's like I can merge with any shadow that I touch.
Mm.
And like let's say there's a person who can breathe underwater. If I merge with their shadow, I too can breathe underwater.
Okay.
Let's say that there's a person who can, Bakura has this dagger called the Drinking Dagger.
Hmm.
And when he cuts people, it heals him. So it's like vampiric dagger type of
Mm.
situation.
Okay.
So if she is in his shadow, she gets that power too.
Okay.
But it's not actually his shadow that she has to be touching, it's the dagger shadow.
Oh, okay. Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like, these are some of the complications. And then I said, all right, well, every superpower is also kryptonite. And I'm big on this coin concept. Like a coin is an entangled thing. Like, I'm really into quantum entanglement, which is big in my book.
Yeah.
Right. It's entanglement. 2 things that are connected that should not logically be connected. And I like to think of a coin.
Mm.
Like, a coin is always heads and always tails.
Hmm.
It's just which one do you see right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's never not heads and it's never not tails. Or like with I call my orcish coins like the heads is a face
Mm,
and then the tails is a heel, the face and the heel.
mm,
And the heel is always blank. It's always invisible. It's always nothing so that
mm.
it looks like a moon,
Okay. Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because well for reasons that I get into later in the books in book 5. But so there's this idea of like, well, she's the merging mage. What's the opposite of merging? Severing. And
Hmm.
so what she'll do once she gets to like a level of mastery, or what she'll come into contact with other people who are, getting magic from the shadow goddess, is people who they don't merge, they sever.
Okay.
So it's people who can sever magic from the person, or they have a void field, or they can, like, let's say that Nala is connected to a shadow, they can sever her from that shadow, right? So that the shadow is still got a power and Nala's still got a power, but she can't connect to it,
Okay.
right? And so things like that. Um, those are some of the really core things that, like, once I got those in place, the story started to bloom and blossom.
Right.
And that's not where the story started, but that's where the story is. That's what the story's about now.
Sure, sure, yeah. No, that's amazing. I actually love the concept of an emotion-based magic system. I'm curious, the person you mentioned who was sort of against it, what is like just, out of curiosity, what is the argument against an emotion-based magic system? Because to me it makes logical sense.
Mm.
Like
Yeah,
like it all fits together when I think about it. So I'm just curious, like what's the argument against it?
yeah. Well, and for me, I'm like I very much subscribe to. I can't remember. I think it's Kahneman, right? The
Yeah.
thinking fast and thinking slow. We're not thinking machines that feel. We're
Right.
feeling machines that sometimes think.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And I very much subscribe to that. But the argument was that it's irresponsible to write a world where people are rewarded for being more emotional,
Mm,
was largely where the argument went to. And I'm I don't know, um I'm trying to write something true,
sure.
And so, I mean, I don't think that that's actually a useful thing to tell people, is like push your emotions down,
Yeah.
because that's just going to create leakage. It creates leakage.
Yeah.
It creates conflict, and then it creates resentment in a lot of scenarios. Um, but also, like, it's just not true.
Yeah.
And like I'm already making so many things that aren't true. Like there are orcs and there are dwarves and there are magma elves and there are giants. Like I need the emotional shit to be real.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. Yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
like it's fantasy, right? It doesn't all have to be quote unquote true, right? That's why it's fantasy.
Yeah.
And then also
Yeah.
on top of that, I'm also a big believer, and it's like you create the world, you set the rules. As long as you stick to the rules you created, then nothing's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also like I do believe that it should be saying something, and I've found a way to talk about emotions. And
Hmm.
like I mean, it's gonna be 9 books, and each of those books, Nala has to learn something new about herself.
Yeah,
And emotions are difficult to master, but they're important to master. If you can master your emotions, that's the only way to master yourself.
right, right.
You have to come to terms with the fact that you feel anger. The Enneagram, like I call it the face stack: fear, anger, embarrassment.
Hmm.
Which is like if I'm quick building a character, I just figure out what their face stack is, and then like something about their appearance, what their voice sounds like, and then I don't know, so a couple more details, right? But
Sure.
those are the core things. But those line up really well to the Buddhist poisons, actually.
Mm,
Anger is ignorance, the poison of ignorance. And then fear is aversion, literally another word for fear. And then embarrassment is a really interesting one. It's craving.
mm.
So the Buddhist poison of craving is really fascinating to me. And for me, I feel like that lines up really well with embarrassment or shame or self-worth. There's this idea of I I'm craving something. I'm
Hmm.
craving something from other people. I'm craving something, it's the self-worth types or the embarrassment types.
Absolutely. Okay, no, that's great. So yeah, now that we're kind of like, talking about your series, specifically, Moon Thread, which is available on Substack now.
Woo!
I was curious if you would like to go ahead and show us the excerpts that you've prepared for today so that the listeners can kind of get a feel for your writing style and the world that
Yeah.
we're talking about here.
All right, so I'm going to read 2 excerpts, and so these are Prelude, which is the start here chapter, if you will, the one that the most people have read. I think right now I've got like 50 likes and 30 comments or something like that. Very
Nice.
grateful.
Yeah.
And then I'll read from the most important chapter in the book, which is called The Temptation of Bakura. And it's chapter 16, but it's the one that like I was telling Bradley beforehand. It's kind of like if you know anything about Spider-Man, you know that Uncle Ben dies and
Hmm.
he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And those are his last words. And they change Spider-Man's entire worldview, right? That's what I call a midpoint chapter. That's where the story reveals what it's actually about to you,
Hmm.
right? At first, you go into Spider-Man and you think that it's a story about getting powers. And then at the midpoint moment, you realize it's about using powers responsibly
Right.
and taking responsibility for your actions. So I'll read the prelude chapter, the first what it's like, and then I'll read the Temptation of Bakura.
Sounds great.
Prelude. Once upon a moonful night, there was a girl who was an orc. She had gold slitted eyes and dark green skin. Her black hair, when light touched it, drank it in. And when she turned 11, she began to have true dreams. Circle turn, circle turn, circle turns again. Dreaming, half awake, she sees a boy. He's racing in between tall birches. She thinks, not sees. She is. She is the boy, like always. Dry twigs crunch. His eyes are colorblind, and hers are not. She feels his heart thump in her ears. Another true dream. She can feel the pull, the painful tug of each quick breath he breathes. He's hungry. He hunts tonight. He's playing hunter. He grips his bone dagger so tightly it hurts, but still it's better than letting it slip out of his sweaty, slick grip. The thing and what's within the bone both agree. He sprints. Dry birches flit until it comes upon a creek. He stops and listens for it. A rustle in the brush. His eyes pursue it. Hisses the dagger and wincing. He goes after into bramble. Dry thorns prick. His shins sing when stung, but still he runs. It's not much use. He's quick, but not as quick as what he hunts. Not even close. Not even close. It's gone. Not fast enough, she hears him think. He gives a groan, and then the dagger hisses, harmonizing with the chill spring wind. But the dagger's hiss insists. He sighs, but grudgingly obliges it. He has holes in both his boots. She feels the wetness of the grayscale grass poke through with each and every hungry step he takes. It glows. It glows. The bone dagger glows, as red as quenched revenge. She feels the red, but then slip. Careless, he turns far too fast. Slow motion fall. There goes his footing. He seems to hang suspended in the air until the ground slams into him. He lands hard on big braided roots. She feels the breath get knocked out of him. Only then does she feel his pain bloom. The dagger hisses. I know it did, he wants to scream. I know, but he can't even speak yet. And if he could, who would hear? I would, she dreams. He writhes and leers up at Mount Racewood. Hey, she thinks, I know that place. How did he get all the way to stop? He thinks aloud. He gets up groaning and rubs his sternum. Not a good pain. The hand that holds the dagger squeezes, but the dagger can't heal. The dagger can't heal until it drinks. Fine, the boy shouts. The spirit grins. The girl goes hollow. The second time he says it quiet. Fine. No, thinks Nala. Defeated now, he lets please, she thinks the spirit don't in. He moves with new speed. So fast he gets lightheaded, and so does the dreamer. The world leans red. Each shadow seems to recoil away from red day's touch. Within a dozen hateful, hobbled breaths, he knows, she thinks again. He pins down some furry. Don't do it, howling creature, please. And as the dagger flays, Nala's eyes snapped open. She blinked the bleariness away. She lay there in the dark, safe on her back in bed. Her heart was thumping in her ears, but all around her the day was peaceful. Day, she thought. It had been day in her dream, her daymare. She shook it off and clenched her eyes shut. Just a dream, thought Nala. The last thing she had seen was the doomed creature's eyes, and its eyes were just a dream. Nala's tusks were finally beginning to come in, which was more painful than she'd expected it to be. Her gums were always sore, but now at least they were more like tusks. Before they'd just been long, thin teeth like cat fangs. Wimpy, at least in her case. Nala listened to her heart thump as she looked at the ceiling. She watched slivers of light flutter through the shadow, slicing in through heavy closed curtains. Nala's black hair fanned out all around her like tendrils of a dark halo, like bottomless shadows, keeping her safe from sun and suffering and daylight and bad dreams. The warm wind rolled off of Mount Wraithwood, buffeting Nala's window. Nala closed her eyes. The wind kept hissing. And it was also distant now. The wind and all the hunger, the day, and even her gran and her small snoring. Nala breathed in, just a dream, and let herself get heavy. And hoped she wouldn't dream.
That was excellent. Is that the end of the first excerpt?
Yeah, that's the end of the first chapter. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yes. No, I didn't want to interrupt you, but that's amazing. Yeah, no, that felt like a very good place to end that first excerpt in that chapter. So yeah,
Cool.
before we jump into the second excerpt, just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Some really cool stuff came through there. Number one, I picked up a lot of what you were talking about in terms of the poetic sort of rhythm and the pacing, especially the way you narrated it. There's very much some intentionality behind like the phrasing and the pace of each line, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved that. It was beautiful. It came through amazing.
Thank you. Thank
And,
you.
and then obviously, there's a lot of that, very like poetic kind of language. One of the lines that really jumped out at me was the one about red as quenched.
Yeah. Let me find that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It glows, it glows. The bone dagger glows as red as quenched revenge.
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
That was a good line.
Thanks. Yeah, so like there's all this hungry and thirsty, like the wetness of the grayscale grass poked through with each and every hungry step he takes. It glows. It glows. The bone dagger glows as red as quenched revenge. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm glad that that popped out.
yeah, no, it was really, really good. And like I said, the style that you described up until this point in the interview really came through in that excerpt. So
Cool.
I'm really glad that you read that. I think the listeners are really going to enjoy that as well.
And that's a cool moment to bring up actually because like
Yeah.
this is like a quick thing on poetic form because
Hmm.
I love poetic form. I'm
Hmm.
obsessed. I'm a nerd about it. And there's this great book called Shakespeare's Metrical Art, which the first four chapters are all of the English language poets leading up to Shakespeare, and
Hmm.
then it's just a ton of chapters about Shakespeare specifically, and it's all about the words. It's not about his life. I don't care whether you think he was real or not. The words are incredible. Study the words, right? And that book changed the way that I thought about everything because it's all about phrases.
Okay.
To be or not to be, and then you finish the rest of it because the phrase gets stuck in your head and then you finish the rest of it. It's a drop in, right? And I like to say that like Hemingway said, write one true sentence if you get stuck. And I like to say, write one true phrase because
Mm.
like all my loving, don't let me down. Um, oh, that this too solid flesh, like, but it goes for all kinds of stuff. It goes for modern stuff. You can't handle the truth. I can't remember the Breaking Bad one, but there's a quote that everyone says from Breaking Bad, right?
Mm.
I am your Luke. I am your father is a phrase that gets
Hmm.
stuck in your head. And if you want like Parks and Rec and The Good Place are great at phrases. And so there's that line. It glows. It glows. The bone dagger glows as red as quenched revenge. And so I would split that up into three phrases. It glows. It glows.
Hmm.
The bone dagger glows
Yep.
as red as quenched revenge. So that's three phrases, but it's not but it glows, it glows. The bone dagger glows,
Hmm.
right? And it has this like I am, drop lift, drop lift, drop lift.
Mm.
The bone dagger glows as red as quenched revenge. And then like that, Robert Frost has this poem called The Span of Life.
Hmm.
The old dog barked backward without getting up. I can remember when he was a pup.
Mm.
And that line, Patrick Rothfuss talks about that line. The first line is impossible to say fast, and then the second line is impossible to say slow.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's rhythm. That's rhythm. That's the power of rhythm. The
Mm.
old dog barks backward without getting up. He's
Mm-hmm.
dying. I can remember when he was a pup. He's
Mm-hmm.
running around. Beautiful. It glows, it glows. The bone dagger glows as red as quenched revenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, that I'm really glad I pointed out that line because I love that context around it. Okay, so why don't we do the second excerpt? If you want to give us a little
Cool.
context for it, and then we can jump right in.
Yeah, yeah. So, in that chapter, in the prelude chapter, she's dreaming about a boy. Okay, and she's dreaming as the boy, and this is like a Rey and Kylo Ren kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I actually got the idea from this. I was looking up entanglement and the true science of entanglement is in our world, at the same time that I watched The Last Jedi.
Okay.
And think whatever you want about whatever trilogies. That movie is really interesting. It does a really interesting thing by entangling Rey and Kylo Ren. They can be on different planets and they can hear each other's thoughts in certain moments. I was like, I'm gonna have a slice of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there is this idea of the sun and the moon, right? The sun and the moon are often in mythologies and in fantasy mythologies entangled. There is the sun, and the opposite of the sun is the moon. And like in my story, the moon is in love with the sun. The goddess that is the moon is in love with the god that is the sun. And the god that is the sun is in love with anybody he can get in love with. Um, and so there's this idea of like, and they have chosen their avatars in this world. And the moon's avatar is Nala, and she's just born with it. And then the sun's avatar is this kid named Bakura, because Bakura was available, because Bakura got a dagger. And my book of poetry, Orc Lore, the last poem in there is the sealing of the sun. And the story of Moonthread is them freeing the sun.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is the midpoint chapter. The context here is the dagger has been telling Bakura, go across the continent. You're a child soldier. You have nobody. You have nothing. Go across the continent. I'm going to tell you where to go. I'll get you there. I'll help you survive. Don't worry, I got you. I need your help. Get me there, and I will well, you'll see. I'll do something in return.
Okay.
And this is him getting into where the dagger wanted him to go. And Nala is with him.
Okay.
Chapter 16, The Temptation of Bakura. And this is me being like, what would a demon have to offer you to get you to say yes? The room was huge, and its smooth stone walls were strange to see. Instead of reflecting light, the walls drank it in. The whole place danced with warring colors. In the center of the room, there was a column of green light over an ancient altar. The light had no starting point and buried itself in its own reflection. Tired shadows hummed over Bakura's bumpy scars, 1, 2, 3 pale lines that streaked across his too young face. The floor of the chamber was smooth and made of obsidian. It looked like a massive mirror. The green light's reflection went endlessly down, down into the earth. Something floated there, in the air. Whatever it was hovered above the altar like it was trapped in the green column. There were other colors too, blue clouds and a yellow hiding moon. The stars were there and they twinkled too, but they were dim and far and hard to see on a rain-stippled night. But all Bakura, the colorblind boy, saw was red. He felt it in the dagger. He heard it in the wind. The dagger felt red in his hand, and that's when he noticed that the dagger was in his hand. He did not remember drawing it. After what felt like forever, he stopped before the light and looked up at it. The thing that floated there was, oh, Bakura said. He walked around the column and gave Nala his profile without meaning to. What is it? Nala said across the room. She had to project so it echoed. She wasn't willing to get any closer. Bakura gave her his smirk. Come see for yourself. Just tell me, Nala said, not budging. He scoffed and finally turned to study it. It looks like it kind of looks like a face. He studied it closer. No, I think it's I think it's a mask, Bakura said. The mask that floated there had been made out of something's skull, the skull of a tiger, or perhaps a boar, or an orc. Green light lit it from above and below, but even so, the facets in the bone seemed to hum with red. It seemed alive. To do is let me fall. Even though it was held completely still in the vice of green light, Nala knew that it was where the wind had been coming from. Nala heard it, but only because Bakura could hear it. The ring on her finger hummed, and the mask turned sharply to face her. The mask's eyes had glowing red dots, not where an iris would be, but in the very center of the sockets where the nerve would take its root. As it flared, it made a sound, and so did the dark ring. And Nala felt her right arm move without her consent. Her hand rose up in the air, and it was with a will of its own, and her palm faced the mask, and the green light intensified. The mask screamed in pain. It was tamed. The mask's eyes were no longer glowing, having been battered into submission. Uh, Longer will you punish me? Hummed the ring, or whatever was inside of it. The flare of shadow receded, and it was just a normal ring again. The column of green light softened ever so slightly, allowing, allowing the floating mask to move around a bit. Not much, but enough. Just enough. Boy, pleaded the mask. Nala rubbed her arm. Every muscle had been tense so hard she was immediately sore. She'd never felt a soreness like this before, and it became hard to even make a fist with her right hand. Bakura was afraid now, and unable to hide it. No, he stammered. He was in a cold sweat. He was setting down the dagger. No, this was not a good idea. I should never have. Wait, he said. Wait. Bakura looked up at it, dagger still in his grip. Oh, thought Nala. The dread was really on now. Think about what? Bakura said. Thirsty. Nala stood there and thought, do something, do something, stop him. But the mask had his attention now. Think of the power. Think ever again. Or please, your life. Yes, I remember that too. I do. I was there. Or at least a part of me was, yeah. Bakura shifted his weight from one foot to the other. What power? He said. What power? The mask chuckled. What power do you want? I know you so well, but you do not know me. How lucky you are. You see. The wind rolled through as hot and red as the heat of summer. Like the one that was the sun, the one that was the day. I am the god of vengeance, and my tithings are that very vengeance. The gift is in the taking. Don't you long for vengeance, boy? No need to lie. We're all friends here. I see him. The Death Knight, I see him. I'll help you, I see him. Or even better, I can bring her back, you know. Bakura stopped at that.
That was intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah,
So
no, I mean
there's
the way that you built the tension in that scene was absolutely amazing. And like the kind of flow of the scene and like the logic, kind of playing out in the characters' minds, especially Bakura, I think was just fantastic. Like really, really nice the way that all flowed. And
thanks.
yeah, and honestly, I was just kind of sitting there being like, yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah, he has actually let me get my guitar real quick. Earlier, Bakura has a song.
Okay.
He has a song. Let me get my guitar. Um and it's uh when the desert calls my name out, what name do you hear? Is it wrath or is it mercy? Does it sound like fear? I wish I were a tender wing. I wish I was a gentle thing. I miss the way you used to sing. I miss you most of all. I miss you most of all. And he sings that when he thinks that Nala is asleep. And I always kind of loved that. Let's see if I can
Cool.
when the desert calls my name out, what word do you hear? Is it wrath or is it mercy? Does it sound like fear? I wish I were a gentle thing. I wish I was a tender wing. I miss the way you used to sing. I miss you most of all. I miss you most of all.
Hmm. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, a little bit about Bakura. Like, it's kind of funny because, like, they say make the book about your hero, right?
Yeah.
And what I've tried to do with Nala is at the sort of center point of all of these people's lives for a lot of these books. But Nala is only the hero of her ninth book.
Mm.
The way that she is changing is she's learning who and what to trust for the
Hmm.
first eight books of her, because it's a trilogy of trilogies. You know, a trilogy for her childhood and like getting power, and a trilogy for adulthood. Now that you have power, are you good at wielding it, using it?
Hmm.
Spoiler alert, no. Or prophecy alert, I guess, no. And then the last one is like, when you're Gandalf, when you're no longer the hero of the story, what does the right thing look like? You know, what does it mean to do the right thing? And she's only really the hero of that ninth book. And all of the rest of them, you know, this is a book about Bakura taking the mask
Mm.
and, you know, what the price of that is, what the price of becoming a necromancer is.
Mm.
You know, and like, honestly, that was a big inspiration for the book in general. Was I For a long time the book was called The Necromancer
Mm.
because necromancers are in all of the fictions that we have bad guys. You
Hmm.
know, necromancer, big bad evil guy. But in reality, if you can raise the dead, that's what Gilgamesh is about. The oldest fictional tale that we have, and a fictionalized, you know, version of a king's reign. In that story, that's about him having a best friend, and then that friend dies, and he's trying to bring that friend back.
Hmm.
Or Orpheus and Eurydice, you know, like Orpheus is a hero for trying to bring Eurydice back to life. If someone was actually a necromancer, that would be a hero. That would be a person that got worshipped a
Hmm.
lot because it's like, well, maybe you can bring back my people, you know. Jesus was a necromancer in a way. It's just that he only brought himself back to life.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And so I was like, all right, well, what is that going to look like? What does it look like for somebody to bring back the dead?
Hmm.
And in the first Warfather, in the poem in Orc lore, the sun brings back a person from the dead for the first time. And the sort of the I've already read enough excerpts, so I won't read the excerpt from that. But basically, at the end, it's like the first time that he brought somebody back. I say that gods have firsts sometimes too. And the thing is that she had been rotting for so long that he was able to get the body to move,
Mm.
but the brain had decayed. And
Mm.
so I have this idea of like in you know in this world you can bring a body back to life
Right.
if you can reconstruct the brain,
Okay.
or if the brain, or if they're recently dead enough that the brain is still intact,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But it's that sort of George Martin idea of like, well, you know, this is fantasy, but also like that, if I can make that more real and more visceral, you know, you have the power to bring that person back as long as ABCD, right?
Right.
And so it's just kind of funny because like you know, I both of the excerpt chapters are about Pecora in a big way.
Hmm.
The first one is the dagger helping him become a hunter and survive. He's starving. He's hungry. He's hungry. He's hungry. He's stepping hungry. He's feeling hungry. He looks hungry. The red is hungry. And then in that second one, it's very much like, all right, well, here's the temptation. Do you take it? And it's book one. Yeah, he takes it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, thank you again for all the context and for the excerpts. I mean, that was amazing. Yeah, I know people are going to love hearing that. So, as we get into the final part of the interview here, I'd like to just talk about kind of what you got going on Substack, what's coming up in the near future here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, so yeah, go
And do
ahead.
we
Just
have time to talk about your series? We should. I'm so sorry. I've been going on and on and on.
no, you're fine. You're fine. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can give a quick pitch on the series. I am I love fantasy. I actually have kind of two different connected universes that a lot of my stories exist in, and then the rest of my work just kind of falls into its own sort of, standalone, different settings and whatnot. But a
Yeah,
lot of my
yeah.
stories on Substack will either fall into a connected horror mythos of mine, or they exist. All my fantasy stories exist in a connected sort of realm that has actually
Mm.
gotten a lot of attention since I joined Substack. And it's really funny because I consider myself a horror writer primarily, but then this fantasy project of mine, I wanted to do a world where fantasy and like sci-fi and technology kind of incorporated into one place. And
Yeah.
so I was working on that as kind of just a fun side thing. And then on Substack, all of a sudden, people are just latching on to that fantasy sci-fi world. And I'm like, okay, cool. Didn't see that one coming. You know what I mean? But yeah, so the transmedia project that I'm working on is associated with my horror mythos. Like I said, a lot of my horror stories take place there, not all of them. But it's structurally, it's very much kind of like a horror multiverse type thing. It deals a lot with like
Ooh.
parallel universes and whatnot. And so, um, my first guest on this podcast was my best friend of over 20 years, who's an animator.
I
And
actually listened to that one. That was the
okay,
first interview that I listened to. That was a cool
yeah,
interview.
yeah. So the Transmedia project is a project that I'm working on with him, and I think we're up to like 10 or 15 other people, all volunteers right now, but they're working on the project with us. And yeah.
Sick. That's
And
so
the
sick.
idea started as an animated series, and I wanted to do a combination of horror and comedy. And, on a deeper level, I wanted to have themes of like kind of just mental health and like kind of have something to say, obviously, in the series. Um, and yeah, so it's a horror comedy series, and yeah, as it kind of came together, I said, okay, well, I want this series to exist inside of my horror mythos because once I connect it to that broader multiverse, it opens up so many possibilities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what's happening now is we're developing the animated series and then I'm thinking about how it's connected to my broader horror universe. So I've been writing short stories on Substack that kind of fall, in and around the animated series as a way to kind of start building those transmedia foundations. So
Yeah.
you've got the animated series, you've got some of my short stories, and then coming soon, I'm going to launch a new podcast that's set within the same fictional town as the animated series, and the podcast is going to be
Mm.
these two guys talking about the history of the town and some of its strange urban legends and whatnot. And
Like a
that's what's
Welcome
going
to
to build out.
Nightville kind of thing?
Exactly. Yes, it's very much inspired by
Yeah,
Welcome to
sick.
Nightville. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's those are some of the pieces so far. You got the animated series, you got short stories, and you got an upcoming narrative podcast. And I'm hoping
So
to do
what
even more. So
so like what the thing with the multiverse, right, is, endless possibilities. Is there anything that's like tying the multiverse together?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the way that the multiverse is structured is you have all these parallel universes, and they all exist within the mind of an eldritch being called the Dreamer, who's essentially dreaming this entire multiverse and is like sort
Mm.
of powering it, quote unquote. And prior to us existing within this multiverse, there was this. I don't want to say a race because there's like so many different versions of them, but basically there were these old gods, like very Lovecraftian, like these old gods that used to exist here, and the old gods were essentially exiled and kicked out of the multiverse when we arrived. And so
Okay.
all these old gods exist in a prison outside the multiverse, and that prison is guarded by these immortal kind of guardians who are called wardens. And so wardens essentially try to just make sure that we are safe, that the multiverse is safe. But these old gods that I refer to as the exiled ones, they're finding different ways in. They're finding cracks in the wall, if you will. And
Mm.
that's where a lot of the short stories kind of tie into the broader storyline. And in the animated series, we're zooming into a small town that's a very important element of the multiverse because it's what's called a nexus. And nexus points are where kind of like ley lines and parallel realities converge. And
Mm.
they are the only places where you can enter or exit the multiverse. So they have a lot of power flowing through them.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, so yeah, that's a real quick pitch, but yeah, that's
There
the
where the
idea.
cracks in the universe actually are, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And
Cracks in the
so
wall.
yeah, so the animated series will deal with primarily this, the town, but for example, one of the main characters in the series is one of those wardens. He's like a mysterious character that we'll learn more about, and he's obviously there on official business. And it goes from there. But
Sick.
yeah, it's cool stuff. It's cool stuff. I appreciate you asking. And if you want to check it out, on my publications homepage, I have a content directory where I organize all these links so that you can find what you're
Yeah.
looking for. And what we were just talking about, if you look for the section that's called the Synaptic Sprawl Mythos, that's where you'll find
Ooh,
links to all
cool.
this stuff.
Good
Um,
name. The
thank you.
Synaptic Sprawl.
Yeah, that's the name of
So
the multiverse.
is it
Yeah,
like the idea that we these are all synapses of the dreamer?
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, cool. Good
Yeah.
name too.
Yep. But yeah, yeah, that's the rundown on that. I appreciate you asking. Yeah, I
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate
yeah,
you talking about it.
yeah. But yeah, so before we wrap up here, I just wanted you to have the opportunity to kind of talk about what you got going on in Substack. Obviously, Moonthread is available now, the whole book, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. Yep. The whole book is there. The whole book is free. And then I have like sort of a first draft chapter club. I'm writing book two right now.
Hmm.
I was going to start writing it the other day, and then I just sort of got like a sudden inspiration to write a craft book. And then I was like, instead of a craft book, I'll create a craft site. And so I've been making like a whole writing course on school right now. And then I'll be back to writing chapters for book two. So the first trilogy, like I said, of Nala's story
Hmm.
is about her getting power and about her going on her quest. I like to say that Moonthread is her origin story. She's 11. She's Harry Potter's age.
Yeah.
Um, and then book two, she's 19 and she's on her quest.
Okay.
And the whole thing with book two is going from one end of the continent to the other. There's this lich, and it's called the Lich Queen. There's this guy who he's got a lich possessing him, and he every 100 years he needs to get a new body.
Okay.
And he's going after this human specifically because humans can't do magic in this world except for like a few. And so like because they mutate. So like in one of the things that you find out pretty early in Moonthread is the sun cursed all humans. He created a human woman to fall in love with him, and then she didn't fall in love with him, and so he cursed all humans.
Hmm.
No soul, no magic, no anything. So if you heal a human, they get cancer. They heal too well.
Hmm.
If you like, I like to say that there's like a black market for magic drugs for humans.
Hmm.
And so maybe a human takes meth and you can take it 3 times. And each time it makes you stronger, it makes you faster, but your constitution goes down by half.
Right.
And then you take it again and the exact same thing happens. And the positive effects are temporary and the constitution effect is permanent.
Mm.
And then if you take it a fourth time, you die.
Right.
Or like let's say you somebody is bleeding and you try to stop the bleeding. Well, maybe like what happens is it cures their blood, right? So like they all of the blood in them dries up on a certain side of their body or whatever.
Hmm.
That's what happens to humans, and they meet a girl named Rowan, who's a princess, just meaning that she has like a certain lineage. And the human kingdoms are much more hierarchical than the orc kingdoms are. And book two is about them trying to get that human girl who can get magic, like the lich is hunting her because he can use her as a vessel.
Mm.
They're trying to get her to somewhere safe.
Okay.
And so they go all across the continent, and that's book two. And then
Okay.
book three is like they start in prison, and then big showdown.
Mm.
Big showdown where we really find out what Bakura is made of and what kind of person he is.
Cool.
But that all starts with Moonthread, and that's a complicated thing. But if you just type in anthonyleephillips.com, it actually takes you to the Prelude chapter, and all the chapters are linked. I tried to make it really easy. The complicated stuff is not it's all in the appendix. It's all in the back.
Right.
The story is the most important thing for me.
Yeah.
And as you're reading it, I'm trying to give you all the information that you need if you want it. It's like
Right.
reading Name of the Wind. It's there if you love it.
Yeah.
But if you don't love it, it's just supposed to be a fun story to read.
Awesome. 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 No, I love that. I think that's fantastic because it makes it accessible to everybody, regardless of how much they're looking for.
Yeah.
If they just want the story, that's that. If they want to dive real deep, you got that too. That's fantastic.
Cool.
All right. Well, Anthony, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. But thank you so much for being on the show here. This was a phenomenal interview,
Cool.
and I'm really excited to get it in listeners' hands or ears, I guess you could say, and and see what they think.
We should do another one where like it's like a half and half where maybe you can talk about your like read some excerpts from your paracosm, and then I can maybe read like the big fight scene where it's like Nala goes God mode and then Bakura goes God mode and then they fight in chapter 21.
I like that. I will do some brainstorming there. Obviously, we'll be in touch. And as the show continues to evolve, I think that's a great idea for a follow-up interview. So I'll definitely keep that in mind. But again, thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing conversation. And
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Bradley.
yeah, of
You
course,
get
I
a bomb.
appreciate you too.
And you're
Thank
doing
you.
some great stuff on Substack. I mean, it's really, really awesome to see you, like, you're doing so many different things and you're doing all of them well.
Well, thank you.
So
I
it's pretty
appreciate that.
cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, and thank you once again to Anthony Lee Phillips for that amazing interview. And for the record, that second portion of his song there, he was playing guitar, but it seems like some of that audio didn't quite come through. So I wanted to clarify that he absolutely was also playing guitar while singing, which is not easy to do. And he has such a great singing voice that I wanted to leave it in regardless of whether or not you could hear the guitar. As you can see, a very multifaceted, multi-talented human being. So it was an honor to have him on the show, and I really enjoyed that interview. All right, and as we're coming up on nearly 2 hours, I still need to do editing, but nearly 2 hours for this episode, it turns out that I guess it doesn't matter if I don't do an episode next week because you're getting 2 episodes worth of content this week, I guess. I'm going to tell myself that so I don't feel as bad. In any case, next up, we have Echoes from the Void with Voidy.
I can attest, Sir Voidy's the best. He wouldn't dare play it close to the vest. He's here to share, from here into there, the writers and words of which he does care.
Hey there, Voidy. Got some good questions this week, so let's dive right in. Mina Howell asks, how do you get in the mindset to write Eldritch Terrors? I find it hard to wrap my mind around it, let alone write about it.
Well, by their very definition, Eldritch Terrors are something you're not really supposed to wrap your head around. If you can, it means you've gone insane.
You know, Voidy, that's a fair point, and actually it's a good piece of advice.
Wait, what? Go insane?
No. Well, yes. Okay, wait, let me explain. Getting into the mindset for Eldritch Horror means letting go of concrete things. By their very definition, Eldritch Horrors are unknowable. We cannot fully comprehend them. They are the embodiment of the unknown, and that's what makes them scary. So, when you want to write something like that, put yourself in the shoes of a character who's either enraptured or terrified by this concept. They could worship them because, given their sheer nature, they are like gods, and this is how you get a lot of the cultists that you see in these stories. Alternatively, you can put yourself in the shoes of someone trying to wrap their head around what these things are, what they look like, and how to reconcile them with the reality they know, and in that case, most often the character drives himself insane in this pursuit.
Yeah, Bradley's right. You really just have to lose your mind to get into the right headspace.
That's not... You know what, Voidy? Yeah, fine. That should work. Next up, our question is from Kira Finley, who asks, what's your process for world building in 100 words or less? Haha. Okay, I know, a big question, but I'm curious how much you know before you start writing and how you keep track of all the little details in history. Okay, this is a great question, and as Kira asked, I will limit myself to 100 words or less.
Hey, wait a second, do I have to?
Yes, Voidy.
Yeah, okay, fine. But you're gonna check my word count.
Okay, fine, I'll go first. Kira, the best way to think about world building isn't to try and establish every single tiny detail, because ultimately, all of those things aren't going to make it into your story. Should you have an idea of how the world functions from top to bottom? Yes. But when it comes time to write the story, focus on the things that the characters directly interact with over the course of the narrative. Boom! That's 69 words, I just checked.
Haha, nice.
Grow up, Voidy.
Okay, here's my take, Kira. The world is an illusion. Trying to build something that's just gonna fade away like a mirage in the desert is futile. Embrace the chaos. Go insane. Let the world crumble. It's all for nothing anyway. We live in a nihilistic universe that couldn't care less about us. Boom! 54 words.
Voidy, are you just answering Mina's question again?
What? No?
Anyway, Kira, we hope that helps. World building is one of those things that can be daunting and scary, but just remember that all that really matters are the elements of the world your characters encounter. So for example, if they're not going to ever encounter a politician, then your world's politics may not be relevant.
Hey, wait a second, you're going over 100 words there.
I know, I'm sorry. Next question is from Jarrett Sharp, who says, what about replacing time travel with times travel?
Hey, wait a second, is this a math question? I hate math.
No, I think Jared's more suggesting that we replace time travel with travel to specific time periods, or, I don't know, maybe it could be multiplying time travel in some way. I'm not sure.
So wait, is this a question or a puzzle?
You know, I'm not sure, to be honest.
Well, I think the answer is yes. That and 42.
Okay, I agree, Voidy. And thanks to all the questions this week, everyone. We love doing this segment, so appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Last up is next week on Substack. So, as I mentioned, next week's going to be pretty quiet for me since I'll be on a business trip for my day job. I have some plans to potentially publish a couple older stories of mine in the interim, and of course, we'll have our power-up prompt tomorrow as normal, but as I mentioned, there's not going to be an episode of the podcast next Friday. Am I afraid that the algorithm will send me to the depths of the void for missing a week? Oh yes, absolutely. But I also know that this show has fans that will be here when I return, so I'm doing my best not to worry about it. With mixed results. In any case, the Saved as Draft podcast will return on August 1st, so you can mark your calendars for that date. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a productive week while I'm off doing business and meetings and stuff like that. Thank you as always for listening. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. Oh, hey, what you got there?
We wrote this as a poem for Nala.
Oh boy. Okay, let's hear it.
Roses are red, violets are blue, your skin is green, and ours is too.
Well, I guess that's true. You know, your skin's really more of a pale blue, though.
Just let's us have this one.
Okay, fair enough. You know what? I'm sure she'll love it.